Hello again, and thank you for bearing with us during that short hiatus, and welcome to the final event of today's conference. My name is Alex Thomas, an Executive Director here at the IFG, and I'm delighted to welcome the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, Sir Mel Stride, to deliver a keynote address. Sir Mel has been Conservative Member of Parliament for Central Devon since 2010, held more prominent government positions that you can shake a stick at, including Financial Secretary to the Treasury and as Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. He was also an influential chair of the Treasury Select Committee. And he now serves, as I said, as Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer. Very grateful to Mel for coming here. Mel is going to give a speech for about 15-20 minutes or so. I'll then ask him a few questions and then we'll open it up to everybody, including those online. So do submit your questions. Over to you, Sir Mel.
Well, Alex, thank you. And good afternoon, everybody. And thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. Let's start with some economics. I don't think it's controversial to say that our economy has not been firing on all cylinders for some considerable time. In fact, if we had matched the rate of growth that we had before the financial crisis of 2008, our economy would be around 25% larger than it is now. And if we match the productivity of the United States, or indeed France or Germany, then by some estimates our GDP would be between 20 and perhaps even 35% higher than it is now. And of course, in this more productive world, hundreds of billions of pounds more would be flowing into our Treasury every year. Now, alongside low growth, we have a bloated and growing public sector and debt approaching 100% of GDP. And for all the government's rhetoric about getting debt down, it's due to continue rising. When it comes to the challenges we face going forward, this puts us into a perilous situation. Those challenges include the fact that we have an aging population with all the associated costs of pensions, health, and social care. We have rising threats abroad, requiring higher spending on national defence. We have the cost of climate change and the risks of future, as yet unknown, economic shocks, of which we've seen a few in recent years. We simply cannot accept low rates of growth and expect to meet those challenges. Now, there are some who say that anemic growth is our destiny and that it is inevitable. That because the UK is a mature and service-based economy, it is only natural that our rate of growth will stagnate and that governments can do little to change this. I completely reject that. We can get back to higher growth and higher living standards. Indeed, comparator countries have already shown that this is possible. But catching up will require a radical rewiring of our economy, combined with a keen and constant eye on the country's finances. What I have referred to as responsible radicalism. To me, that means a host of different factors all coming together so that every part of the system is leaning into growth. So the Conservative Party will need to have responsible but radical policies ready to go, but also critically the right approach to delivery so that when we are returned to government, we can deal or deliver with a zeal and effectiveness commensurate with the challenges we face and the radical response required to meet them. Now, some changes will be relatively simple to deliver. If they have the fiscal space, a Chancellor can, for example, very quickly legislate to change tax, to cut a tax. That's a simple lever. Although, to be honest, I think with the current Chancellor, it seems to be jammed in just one direction at the moment. But there are a host of other changes which will require more than just a quick flick of a switch. For example, cheaper energy, welfare reform, creating a skills system that accommodates the impacts of lower net migration and the diffusion of artificial intelligence, accelerating home building and infrastructure on budget and on time, and delivering a smaller and less burdensome state, where transformation requires the sustained application of relentless and outsized effort, something that I think few would say has come naturally across government in recent times. So the central argument I want to make today is that we have to radically transform our economy, but recognise that to deliver that transformation, we will also have to radically transform the way that government works. Managerial incrementalism will no longer cut it. In fact, I currently have no confidence that as things stand, the systems within government and our civil service can deliver anything like what is required. Failure to grasp this has been part of the problem with the current Labour administration, with the Prime Minister speaking just recently about his frustration at pulling levers and finding that nothing happens. Labour had 14 years in opposition, but failed to adequately answer the question, how do we make sure that delivery actually happens and at speed? We will not make the same mistake. And that is why the work of organisations like the Institute for Government is so important, why I'm here today. Because government delivery now matters more to our country than it has for many, many years. So what does transformation in delivery look like? Well, in essence, it is about finding new ways of doing things which are more focused and more efficient, and which in turn will require the harnessing of new technologies and approaches. Let me give you a further sense of what I mean. In the last government, I served as the Secretary of State at the Department for Work and Pensions. By the time I left, it was clear to me that the current arrangements for driving change in such a vast and consequential part of government were sadly inadequate. And this matters. The DWP currently touches the lives of millions. It is the single largest spending department in government. It is responsible for spending equal to about 1/10 of the size of the UK economy, over £250 billion per year. But let's think for a moment about who is running that organisation. The ministers may well have little prior experience of the department's policy, and almost certainly no experience of driving an organisation anything like approaching that size. They have been selected from a tiny pool. MPs of the governing party, who have been in the Commons for at least a few years, and have not ruled themselves out in one of a number of possible ways, some of them often quite colourful. A Prime Minister choosing the political leadership required to drive change in one of the largest spending organisations in the world will select from perhaps 200 people who happen to have won a seat at a general election. Now, don't get me wrong, the integrity of a democratic system rightly requires that this is how it should be. But when a Secretary of State comes into a department, they typically arrive with just a few junior ministers and a couple of special advisors. That is the extent of the political team setting direction for the department. And they are inserted into an organisation where the support mechanisms around them and the capacity to drive change at pace are distinctly lacking. Now, that is not to say that departments do not have good, hard-working, dedicated people. Of course they do. I've worked with some of them, including truly outstanding public servants. But they do not have the best people in depth, with the best incentives to deliver on the changes that can be made. Now, just imagine a business with a budget of £250 billion a year and approaching 100,000 employees, a one upon which perhaps 20 million people in the UK directly depend. How would that business go about finding the talent required to continuously transform the organisation such that it provided world-class efficiency and service to its customers? It would search the world for the best talent and recruit that talent through incentive schemes that made those people want to strain every sinew in the pursuit of improvement. That is a far cry from how departments currently operate. We need a smaller civil service, but one that can also attract the very best people too. We need ministers embedded within a high-quality team, substantially drawn from outside Whitehall, and a government machine capable of driving real and rapid change. If you want results in areas that matter, you need the right plan, for sure. But you must also have the right people with the right incentives. And yes, that includes rewarding high performers that can be proven to be good value for taxpayers' money and can help to attract, incentivize, and retain the best and the brightest. Now, if we can slim down and overhaul the civil service along the general lines I've described, then we can get results. And let's dive into a few examples of how change can yield big results. Take the Department for Work and Pensions, and let's take the application of artificial intelligence. At the DWP, I established an AI unit which I located right outside my office. I sensed that at first this was met with some reticence. Why would anybody want to be physically overlooked by the Secretary of State every day? But in time, that team got to understand the advantages of having someone at the top who believed in the power of what they were doing. That team was good. They worked on projects like Whitemail, an AI tool which now reads and analyzes 20,000 pieces of correspondence every day, triages it, and flags urgent cases or vulnerable people. That has saved huge human resource and led to far better outcomes. And we were developing something called A-Cubed, an AI tool designed to listen to interactions between work coaches and claimants in job centres, and then to suggest the best interventions to get them into work, all done in microseconds. That approach could eventually mean work coaches taking on significantly more cases and improving effectiveness at the same time. And when you're employing around 20,000 work coaches, that's a huge deal. It means you can reduce the workforce whilst increasing output. Or what about the use of AI in dealing with fraud and error in the benefits system? Using AI learning that can spot patterns and unearth abuse, like the high propensity of carers allowance claims that the team discovered in a small number of postcodes in a northern town, which led to breaking a Romanian gang who had been costing the taxpayer millions. Now, competition is the driver of AI adoption in the private sector. If you do not adopt, you may not survive. Those dynamics are not there in the public sector. All the more reason why highly incentivized, high-quality people have to be in place to ensure that these kind of transformations are delivered. And more broadly, within the civil service, there has to be a stronger focus on incentives and accountability and a greater sense of meritocracy. For example, I found at the DWP that when trying to implement an incentive scheme for job centres, that there was an ingrained desire from the department to spread rewards widely and thinly across virtually everyone, rather than recognising individual performance. The all-must-have prizes mentality drove down incentives. The unions were suspicious, and the resolve of some in the department to push through change was very weak. I was given every reason under the sun as to why strong, clearly aligned incentives could not possibly work. And yet they are fundamental to performance, and they lie at the very centre of how activity is driven. When it comes to accountability, in some departments, performance reviews are rare, and dismissals for poor performance are almost non-existent. That's across 500,000 employees. Either our civil servants are all vastly better at their jobs than people in the private sector, or a lot more civil servants should be losing their jobs than is currently the case. That needs to be said. And if it is left unsaid, then poor performance will remain unchallenged. In my experience, poor performers are at best managed sideways into other areas of government. There is no fresh probationary period for internal moves within government. And directives to avoid expensive employment tribunals could be ending up as a false economy. The government's Employment Rights Bill will make it riskier still to try to deal with poor performance. The outlook, I believe, is currently bleak. In terms of meritocracy, counterintuitively, the Civil Service Code's requirement for appointments based on fair and open competition could be creating barriers to progression for high performers, while others are over-promoted. Civil servants seeking promotion often have to move to a different area and apply through a central portal with no account taken of past performance or manager feedback, and with assessment based on the generic and infamous behaviours rather than specific role requirements. Now, on the numbers, the civil service is around 37% larger now than it was in 2016. And it's not at all clear what benefit we are getting for that additional resource. So at our party conference last year, I set out our commitment to get those numbers back down to 2016 levels. And we want to go further. This is not just about headcount. The IFG have said before that a crude focus on headline staff numbers is the wrong approach, and I agree. We want to take a deep and comprehensive look at what different areas of government are doing, how they are delivering value, and how we can eliminate unnecessary spending. So we will be working our way through the different departments over the coming months to look at where further savings could be made. That goes for ministerial departments, but also for the vast army of arm's length bodies. And it also applies to how procurement and project management are being conducted, whether that's government IT projects running vastly over budget or infrastructure taking decades to get built. There should be far greater transparency and scrutiny about where money is being spent and for what purpose. Departments should be required to publish much more granular breakdowns of their spending, not just the broad categories and programs which find their way often into meaningless tables in the annual report and accounts. It's too easy at present for departments to sweep waste and mistakes under the carpet, to overstate their funding bids to Treasury, and to present deliberately unpalatable options when asked to find savings. Now, I want to conclude by looking at one very important arm's length body, one that is critical to the uncompromising emphasis that my party is placing on fiscal responsibility. That body is the Office for Budget Responsibility. The OBR has become a vital part of our fiscal framework. It prevents chancellors from marking their own homework, but their role has been questioned in some quarters. It's not hard to see why a politician like Nigel Farage might want to get rid of the OBR when he fought the last election on a manifesto which made £140 billion of fantasy unfunded commitments. Funnily enough, it is usually those who want to play fast and loose with the public's finances who seem to have a problem with the OBR. It was a Conservative Chancellor who established the OBR, and I, as Chancellor, will continue to uphold its role in providing transparency about the state of the nation's finances. To revert to the Treasury marking its own homework would be hugely undesirable and probably lead to a premium on our borrowing costs. But of course, there will be aspects of the way in which it works that might benefit from reform. For example, is the economic modelling sufficiently flexible to fully capture the dynamic impacts of policy? And perhaps sometimes it is the case that innovative approaches are penalised because, by definition, there is little evidence that they have been tried before, in the UK at least, and shown to work. So we will look carefully at the way in which the OBR works. But unlike reform, we stand for fiscal responsibility and independent scrutiny. So, to conclude, I've signalled a lot of intent today. And if there is one thing I want you to take away, it is the commitment I and my party have to radically transform not just the economy, but the way in which government works too. There is nothing more unconservative than change for the sake of change. But my party has a strong history of being radical when our country has faced its most challenging moments. The 1970s and 80s come to mind. Like then, so now, the clock is ticking on a country that is on the slide, and there is no time to waste. Change is needed, change must come, deep and fast. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mel. A number of themes I'd like to explore there, and lots of good IFG topics, as you said. So thank you for that stimulus. I was going to start on the OBR, where you concluded. But obviously there are lots of critiques of the OBR around. I've never been sort of particularly persuaded that it's, it's some sort of deep institutional blocker, or that it gets its forecasts wrong. The Treasury got its forecasts wrong as well. But the one that lands with me is the way the system is set up at the moment is the nature of OBR forecasts intersecting with the fiscal rules means we're in this constant sort of tightrope where the government is always trying to balance the books and is actually creating more instability, as we've seen over the last couple of years, as the current Chancellor tries to find 5 billion here or 10 billion there. I'm interested in whether that's something, both the OBR in connection with the fiscal rules, whether that's something you would, it's on your list of things to look at in terms of reform.
So I think alongside the OBR, certainly fiscal rules and all of that architecture is on the table. We start with a blank sheet and we've got plenty of time to think these three things through very carefully. Ultimately, of course, what matters is not so much the OBR or indeed even the government, it's the markets. So what you have to have is some kind of mechanism of rules and some kind of assessment of your likelihood of hitting those rules, such that the markets look at that mechanism and say, okay, if that architecture tells me that we're basically on track, then that's good enough for me and we're prepared to lend to the United Kingdom at more favourable rates than would otherwise be the case. I think where the OBR often gets criticised is a misplaced criticism, that it is somehow the OBR as the tail that's wagging the Chancellor, the Treasury dog, which I don't see as the case. It is the Chancellor that sets the fiscal rules, and she can determine the timescale on those, what they are to be. We have a debt rule at the moment and a flow rule, etc., and that's fine. That's what the Chancellor has chosen. And it is the Chancellor that will determine what economic interventions she will make through time, principally at fiscal events, in terms of managing the economy. And the OBR will then do two things broadly. One is it will assess the impact of the various interventions that the government is bringing forward, so say a tax cut or rise or whatever it may be, and make a judgment as to how that will impact things like growth and employment and so on. And it will also answer a simple question as to what its judgment is of the likelihood of the Chancellor on that basis hitting her fiscal targets at that date in the future. And that is its role. So it's not to be confused with actually who's got the hand on the tiller of government policy. That is very much the Chancellor. Now, I do think you can have arguments about how successful the OBR is in those two particular aspects. How good is it at assessing the impact, the broad impact of economic interventions as set out typically at budgets? And I think that's where I referred to, for example, things that are innovative, you could argue, tend to get underscored by the OBR, because the OBR, and this would be their defence, would typically look for deep and detailed evidence of something having worked. Well, what that leads you to do, to flip back to DWP, for example, would be if you were trying to squeeze down the fraud and error rate on universal credit, you go to the OBR and you say, look, we've got 10,000 people in a warehouse going through UC claims, and that means that we get this amount out of the pipe at the end and it only costs us this, so score us the difference. Well, actually, the best answer might not be to just say, oh, well, we'll just have another 10,000 and we'll take another uplift on the numbers from the OBR, but to do something entirely different that hasn't been done before, involving, I don't know, AI or something of that nature. So I think that organisation, the OBR, probably has to get better at assessing different ways in which government intervenes economically. And the second thing is it a good forecaster? Well, astrologers are there to make economists look good, right? It's an inexact science. And I don't see why the OBR should, through time, be any worse or than other forecasters, and no forecasters will ever get it entirely right. But I think the most important thing is an independent arbiter and judge of the actions taken by the Treasury. And we see, and we have seen in the past, what happens when you step away from that and say, well, that doesn't matter. As I said at the beginning of my answer, it is the markets that really matter. And that's why I think the OBR needs to be there.
And if Liz Truss had hugged the OBR a bit closer, we might not have seen what we saw?
Well, you might have seen different decisions taken in that so-called mini-budget, because the OBR would have said things that would probably have excluded the possibility of having tens of billions of unfunded tax cuts into a relatively inflationary environment with all the consequences that followed.
Onto the civil service then. I mean, and lots of the messages you said there particularly around, I mean, the size of the civil service is determined by what the government wants to do and its productivity, but particularly around performance management, really important areas there. We've written and talked a lot about that. But I did want to ask about, and this is not a kind of gotcha 14 years of Tory government question, but it is notable that in the first period of that government, the civil service reduced in size a lot, and then it grew, and then successive governments, and this one, to some extent, is really struggling to turn the oil tanker around in terms of civil service numbers, and that's because there'll always be a Secretary of State responding to pressure saying, well, I need asylum caseworkers, I need prison officers, so the pressure will always be there. So how will you know, I was saying to you beforehand, we had a snarky dotted line on our chart on civil service numbers saying Jeremy Hunt's immediate headcount cap happened, and then the numbers kept going up. But how would you, as Chancellor, properly get a lock on that system?
So I think the short answer is to plan well ahead of time exactly how you're going to do it. Now, I know that sounds like a bit of a cop-out, but and not a detailed answer. Indeed, it's not a detailed answer. But look, we have 3.5 years to really get under the bonnet and work out exactly what we're going to do, including the legislation that needs to be prepared in advance and what the game plan is and so on, so that we hit the ground running and do that. And I think that is what this government has palpably failed to do, because it had that opportunity to do exactly that. And I think there is a distinction between a rising civil service headcount on the back of a pandemic and all the kind of things that were happening at that time, and coming into government after 14 years and actually still seeing the numbers rising, as they are right at the moment, over a year into office. So I think the short answer is, you know, doing the hard yards over the next months and years to work out exactly how we are going to be different, and we are going to have a plan that is going to bring those numbers down. Now, that doesn't mean on day one, of course, you have to go in and suddenly shrink the civil service by 25%, which is the implication of going back to 2016 numbers. To get back to the point about fiscal targets, we would be delivering in line with that 5-year horizon across a single Parliament. So we would have time to do that. And of course, it doesn't necessarily mean going in and making a lot of people redundant. Just simply freezing recruitment in certain areas through time can start to weigh into bringing those numbers down as well.
And you talked again in your speech about the small number of, the small size of the political team coming in with a minister, a few special advisors. Interested in whether you would increase the number of special advisors, whether you would you know, change the way that civil servants are appointed. You know, you talked about getting in more external talent that we've written a lot about. And also there's been, you know, in the tail end of the last government, a number of your sort of colleagues and former colleagues sort of seemed to feel that the civil service itself had somehow become politicised, or there was an implicit politicisation around certain issues around diversity or, you know, woke civil service or anything. So I'm interested in, you know, does sensible Chancellor Mel Stride subscribe to that, and how do you kind of engage with those sorts of issues in the civil service?
So I think at the very top, you have certainly got to get more heft when it comes to highly incentivised, high quality people that are going to sit at the top and drive transformation and move the dial. That's really what I was saying in the speech. I think more generally and culturally within the civil service, we have a situation where, you know, performance management in some areas is almost non-existent, or where it does exist. If you take, for example, DWP, it's not done at an individual level. So it's an individual civil servant is not being brought in and given an annual appraisal. Those are often quite rare events. It might be done at a team level, and it might focus on how supportive people are and so on, not the kind of harder metrics that really matter. And you see it there when people move around the civil service. They kind of apply under the open competition rules for a new role. And once again, how they performed previously is not actually taken into account during that process, which is extraordinary. So they could have been a very poor performer in one particular area, present themselves for a move to another, indeed a promotion potentially, and possibly even get that promotion. But the fact that they were a very poor performer elsewhere has never been taken into account in that process. And that is just a sort of cultural thing that's not right. If you look at the survey data as set out in the Restate report of 2024, lots of managers in the civil service will say that an appreciable proportion of the people that they are managing are poor performers. Now, nothing's happening, but they are poor performers. If you, as they do, have people in and interview civil servants about what they feel about what's happening in their area, many of them will complain that they quite resent the fact that they're actually sitting there, perhaps working very hard and doing a good job, but they've got one or two other people in the same area who are not doing that, but they're being treated on exactly the same basis. That demoralises and delegitimizes the people that want to go the extra mile. And that is endemic, I'm afraid, within, I think, the whole organisation.
So for you, it's the performance management that's the key.
I think that's a huge bit. I think the recruitment thing, I think
I would agree with.
who you're going, the incentives. You know, look, incentives are what economics is all about, okay? The fact that I've got this plastic pen here, right, which has probably involved, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of people doing things, right? From extracting the chemicals to the manufacturing plant all over the world to give me something for probably the price of about 10p is because they were all incentivized to do it through the profit motive and the price mechanism. If you have a huge, great lumbering organization and you have none of that strand of incentive to pull in a particular direction, do not be surprised if people sit back and it becomes very unproductive and you have levers that are not attached to it.
There we go. Civil service reform through the medium of the biro is the
there we are.
That is the mantra. And I should say, Whitehall Monitor published today has loads more on all of this on performance management. And you know, I could go down that rabbit hole, but I won't. I'm going to come to questions from the audience and online in just a moment. One final one for me, which I would kick myself if I didn't ask you. I think I know what your answer will be, but Francis Maude would split the Treasury. Would you?
So I don't know is the answer. Other than say we start with a blank sheet of paper, but I'm not going to speculate on big things like that without having done the thinking first. But there are arguments both ways.
Yeah, you tantalise us.
Yeah, there are arguments both ways.
There's a question here, and actually it links to something I was interested in as well, a question online. The question is, how radical are Reform's economic policies compared to the Conservative and Labour Party agenda? My version of that was, what would a Conservative government do differently from this government and from the last set of Conservative governments? What will actually change to make the growth aspiration real?
So I think there are two principal differences between ourselves and Reform. And they're often not about aspiration, actually, because we all want a growing economy and so on and so forth. I think one of them is the approach to welfare and the two-child benefit cap, where we think that it should stay. And they, at a cost of about £3.5 billion, think that it should not stay. And getting back to incentives, if you're going to drive growth and employment, you better incentivise work. You better not tax work and start making it easier not to work, okay? Now, I know there are all sorts of other arguments around that issue, but in pure economic terms, that's the way that you should see it. And I think that's a big difference. And I think that comes with Reform probably from worrying about red wall seats as well as other parts of the country and having to appeal to particular parts of the country where those kind of approaches play well. Nationalising things is something they talk about too. The other difference is the whole point of what I was saying earlier about doing the hard yards and having the plan and being radical but being responsible as well. And what I mean by that is if you take tax cuts, I stood up at our party conference and I laid out 47 billion pounds worth of savings across government, 23 billion of that in welfare. And I set out a golden rule, which is that at least half of that has to go to paying down the deficit, because we are far too indebted as a country, and that's costing us. And then the rest can be used for cutting taxes, and we set out some tax cuts. And that is the way that you should do it. And the lesson of the mini-budget is if you don't do it that way, you pay a huge price. Reform's way, I'm afraid, is the way of the mini-budget, plus plus. So Nigel Farage will say, as they did in the last manifesto, we will take everybody in the income tax regime out of income tax up to £20,000 worth of income. The IFS says that comes with a price tag of about 60 to 80 billion pounds. That's about half what we spend on the National Health Service with its 1.5 million employees every year. It's a colossal amount of money. And yet there's no realistic plan as to how any of that is going to be funded. And if you get into that business, I'm afraid that's where you come seriously unstuck. So my whole point, and I touched on it with the OBR as well, the rationale for the OBR is you have to reassure markets that you economically are the grown-ups in the room who are not going to play fast and loose with the public finances. And that is a key distinction between us and Reform.
Thank you, Mel. Let's do some questions. I'll take them in threes, one at the front here.
Thank you very much. Stephen Gibson, Chair of the Regulatory Policy Committee. In your speech, you compared a government department to a £250 million of industry which would recruit its top team from around the world. Now, that £250 million industry will probably pay its top team 5 to 10 times the base salary of a senior or civil servant or permanent secretary. If they really perform well, they would be giving bonuses of £1 million to £5 million for excellent performance. It is inconceivable that any sort of government department could compete in any way the same way. In some sense, you made the point about economics, the incentives drive behaviour, and that happens in the labour market as well. How do you, I'm not a civil servant, but how do you expect to recruit civil servants compared to similar sized organisations if you pay them a fifth or less of the remuneration?
Okay, so should we just do a few? So
sure.
Let's do another one here. I'm seeing Dave Penman's hand up, but you just asked Dave's questions. Go to the lady in red there, the Telegraph, and then...
Thank you. Julie Zhou from Financial Times Chinese. So how do you look at the Conservative Party's members went to Reform UK, like Nadeem Zahawi? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And then the lady back in red, and then Dave, I'll give you a quick go.
Hi, Amy Gibbons from The Telegraph. I was going to ask something very similar, actually, about Nadeem, because you painted the Conservatives as far more sensible and kind of responsible with people's money than Reform. So why do you think a very recent former Tory Chancellor has decided that they would trust Reform and back them on their economic policies?
Thank you. Very quickly then, Dave.
Thank you, Dave Penman, General Secretary of the FDA. So we represent the most senior civil servants in the country. I welcome your conversion to our campaign for pay reform in the civil service, Mel. Thanks very much for your endorsement for that. And whilst I would challenge the comments you've made about performance, because our members are always complaining about the amount of time that they're spending on performance management systems, and our reps are representing hundreds of civil servants going through performance management. I wanted to challenge your comment about the size of the civil service. We don't know what the world's going to look like in 2029. We don't know if it was a Conservative government, what their plan for government would be. We don't know how public services will be reshaped and technology will change between then and now. How do you know the number of civil servants that should be employed?
Cool. Thank you. So civil service pay and what the right size of the civil service should be, and some challenges to you there, and the Nadeem Zahawi reform question.
Okay, so I think to go in reverse order, the issue of the size of the civil service, so what we'd be doing is taking it back to where it was in 2016. All I would say is, look, the British state didn't fall apart in 2016 because everybody was at the gate saying we need more civil servants, okay? It must be perfectly reasonable to be able to get back to the kind of size which historically, has worked in the past. You are right, Dave, that of course we can never predict the future, but that shouldn't stop us having an aspiration and a desire to achieve a particular outcome. I mean, otherwise you'd end up doing absolutely nothing. You'd be constantly waiting every day to wait for the future in order to decide what you were going to do. On the issue of Nadeem Zahawi, well, he's given his reasons, and that's what he said. I'm not going to really comment on that any further. I always sort of tend to take the Reagan view that you never speak ill of a fellow Conservative. Not that he is now, but he was at one point at least.
Dance with the one that broke is the other.
There'll be plenty of people who speculate on why he's done what he's done. In terms of what level of salaries do you need to go to in order to get the best people and drive the kind of change? I'm not going to sit here and start bringing out numbers, but I will point to the fact that there are parts of the world where this kind of model is in the mix, and Singapore would be an example of it, where what they do there is actually they take an assessment of the highest 1,000 salaries or whatever the median, and they have some kind of discount on that because it's public service, etc. So I think there are ways, it's going to be a case of striking a balance clearly, but I think there are ways of coming at this that do strike that balance between the importance of people doing things because it's public service, but equally getting high quality people on board. Part of the problem within the civil service, it seems to me, and it was one of the frustrations I had as a minister, was that people aren't there for more than about 10 minutes before they've moved off to something else. And the reason they're moving around so much is that's the way, through progression, they're getting more money and so on and so forth. So I think there are other reasons why we need to think about the impact of what people are earning.
Strong agree on the churn point. I'm just going to give you a few very quick-fire ones from online, and then we'll wrap up. Does the Shadow Chancellor believe that if the civil service should be smaller, local government should be bigger? This is our favourite rated question online.
I think all arms of government, local or national, should be set at a level where they do what we want them to do, and that begs lots of questions as to what the state should be doing, both nationally and locally, but as small as possible and as efficient as possible. So I don't think there's any
I'll push you more on that, but I'll let you get away with it. Do you agree that the inertia in public sector transformation and the related lack of productivity is a result of organisations being risk-averse with no personal ownership of change? So accountability is one of our key themes here as well.
Yeah, so I do think as a society we have become way, way too risk-averse. And you see it in arm's length bodies and our regulators in particular. So if you take the consumer duty that the Financial Conduct Authority has, it oversees 57,000 financial advisors and related businesses who will tell you they are so tied up with red tape and regulation that many of them don't think it's worth staying in the market, or they have to pass on those inefficiencies by way of higher prices. And if you ask yourself, why does that happen? Well, typically what happens is that the FCA has oversight of the sector. Something happens in the sector where there's consumer harm. Nick Arathi, the head of the FCA, then gets dragged before the Treasury Select Committee, given a public punishment beating live on television, and told never to ever, ever do that again or let that happen again. And the lesson that he learns and he takes back to the base is that you have to tighten everything up even more in every single possible area to squeeze risk and potential harm entirely out of the system. The problem is, if you do that, and you see it in all walks of life, if you do that, what you do is you end up not getting the growth, not getting people taking chances and going out and generating employment and growth and all the things that we need as a country.
Last one from me, which takes us back to where we started really, which is that former OBR Chair Richard Hughes criticised the rolling nature of fiscal rules. What's your view on rolling targets and their effects, but also perhaps generally, the fiscal rules at the moment? Do you think the government's got them right?
So I don't think moving to, in the spring, deciding that they're not going to have the OBR actually produce an economic and fiscal outlook, i.e. make a judgment on whether the rules are currently going to be met, is the right thing to do. As I suggested earlier, we are looking at the fiscal rules and the fiscal framework around those rules, and I'm not in a position at the moment to tell you where we're going to land on it.
We will await.
I know that's frustrating.
We will await with interest, but equally we don't want rushed decision making. We want you to properly.
We've got to get away from
all the
finding quick fixes, and this is what we're going to do. We've got plenty of time, and we should use it wisely. Yeah.
On that note, thank you very much, Samel Stride, and to everybody here.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So we're going to scarper, and I will hand over to Hannah.
Okay, well, thank you everyone who has stayed the course. It was an early start this morning and a bit of a delay to that last event, so thank you so much for joining us. I think it's been a really fascinating day of discussion. If you missed any of it for any reason, links to all the recordings of all the sessions will be on our website soon, so you can watch them back. But just to do a little recap for you, we started bright and early with Wes Streeting, who set out his thoughts on reform of the state, going well beyond his DHSC brief, arguing that people in government have lost the belief that the state can do big things, and focusing on the importance of leadership, two themes which have been reflected throughout the day. Next, I was in conversation with Dame Louise Casey, who set out some frank and frankly fascinating reflections on her career inside and outside government, agreeing with Streeting that government has got to a place where it doesn't believe that change is possible. She focused on the importance of meaningful accountability and a can-do attitude. Then we had a fantastic panel on the centre of government. Kelly Beaver set out Ipsos's fascinating polling, which they did exclusively for us, and that showed the public's pessimism about the government's ability to deliver in the short term, but their wish for government, pleasingly, to keep working for the long term. She argued that politicians need to be merchants of hope, and Ed Balls also focused on the importance of politicians taking people with them, as well as making some very interesting reflections on the centre from his time there. Next, we were joined by Andy Burnham from Manchester for our panel on rewiring the state. My colleague Hannah showcased some of the key findings and fantastic IFG charts from our latest Whitehall Monitor report, published today. You can find that on our website. Do take a look at the whole thing. On that panel, I was particularly struck by Michael Gove's emphasis on the importance of politicians having the humility to ask stupid questions if they are to actually work out what's going wrong in government. After lunch, we explored the prospects for elections in 2026, fewer elections than we had previously thought we might be going to have, but we had various interesting predictions about possible electoral and political outcomes. Next, I was in conversation with Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, Darren Jones. That was a properly IFG discussion about how his various roles are working. It also whet our appetite, I think, for his speech next week, particularly my curiosity was piqued by his comment that he doesn't believe that incremental change is going to be sufficient to meet the challenge that the public is setting. Then a brilliant panel of my colleagues joined us that was chaired by the great Carolyn Quinn to give their assessments of the government's progress so far across public services, policy making, public bodies and the work of ministers. And finally, we've just had a really interesting keynote from Mel Stride, the Shadow Chancellor. It was interesting, I thought, that he shared Darren Jones's analysis that what he called managerial incrementalism is not going to cut it when it comes to state reform. So focus from both sides of the political spectrum on the importance of the work, really, that we do here at the IFG. And Mel also brought us back to one of the themes that started the day, which is the importance of having the very best people in UK government and incentivising them properly. So thank you again for joining us here and online for what's been a brilliant day. For me, it's those themes of leadership, accountability and public trust in government that have really stood out, and I can assure you all that those are themes that the IFG will continue to focus on. Before we end, I want to say some very quick thank yous, particularly to the entire team here at the Institute who've worked so hard to deliver this fantastic event for us all today, particularly our events, comms and operations teams, especially to Sam McCrory, our Director of Comms, who can't be here today, also to Kath Haddon, who's stepped into his role in his absence. And finally, a really big thanks to Grant Thornton for continuing to be such fantastic partners for this annual conference. Thank you, everyone.